Hi everyone, I'm Alexander Marlow, Editor-in-Chief of Breitbart News, and thank you for joining me on this multi-universe, all over the internet interview we're going to have here with Dave Rubin in just a moment. First of all, thanks to all of you for making Breitbart once again one of the top 5 news websites across the entire internet in the United States, according to Amazon's Alexa.com, and as well making us at our highest ranking ever, number 8 in the world on Facebook. Thanks so much to all of you for sharing these clips. All of your platforms closing in on 1 million in terms of our followers on Instagram, and we really appreciate it because don't do any advertising. It's all word of mouth. It's all thanks to you guys. Without any further delay, Dave Rubin is with me. You guys probably know Dave. He's pretty ubiquitous on the internet these days. He's got a super popular YouTube channel, The Rubin Report. He's got a popular book out, Don't Burn This Book, clever title. There, he does a lot with PragerU and is probably known as one of the better interviewers out there, period. And really an early adopter to the new media landscape on video. And Dave, let's start there. You've really seen the total evolution of the video landscape online, starting with a small YouTube channel, growing it to one of the biggest around. And during that time, we've seen unbelievable amounts of censorship. You've weathered it all. Just give us the whole journey.
Yeah, well, first off, Alex, I should say I could burn it all down right now just by appearing with you scary people at Breitbart. I know I'm going to get a tremendous amount of hate, and I expect that you're going to say all sorts of racist, bigoted things to me that I'm going to have to push back against and all of that good stuff. Obviously.
Don't forget homophobic. That's coming later.
No, I know the racism and the transphobia and the homophobia. I assume you're being nice up front so you can sort of slide that in a few minutes very subtly.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you know, I guess I was one of the early adopters on all of this. And I think there's a couple reasons for it. You know, I did stand up in New York City for about 12 years. I started in 98. It seems like a real lifetime or several lifetimes ago, but that's 22 years ago. And I did it for about 12 years in New York, and then I did road work for a while. And I moved out to LA in 2013. And I remember as I was doing stand-up in those later years that, you know, a lot of comedians sort of thought that the world wasn't changing. They thought that they could do stand-up in a club, perfect a 5-minute set, and then they'd get on like the Johnny Carson Tonight Show, which was long gone already, and Johnny was going to sit you down next to him, and you were somehow going to get a sitcom or get a talk show. And that is the way it worked, you know, in the 70s and 80s. You can go through every comic that happened for: Seinfeld and Tim Allen and Roseanne Barr and Louis Anderson and the long list, Ray Romano, the long list of people that succeeded that way. Well, I started seeing the landscape changing because that just wasn't happening for people anymore. And that was just when YouTube was kind of starting and there was this thing called podcasts and all that. And I actually started a podcast. I kid you not, I did not even know how to download the podcast, yet I was doing a podcast. So I was kind of early on that, truly had no idea to download it. I kept saying to the guy I was doing the show with, I don't know how to download this. I don't know how anyone else is going to do it, but people started listening to it. And then in 2013, I thought, you know, I had a show on SiriusXM actually, and I was trying to get on the political channels. They threw me on the OutQ channel, which is the LGBT channel. I never wanted to be on there. I went to all the executives all the time, and I made demo tapes. And I said, look, I'll go on the left-leaning channel. POTUS is sort of the nonpartisan channel. I'll be on the right channel. I guested on a lot of the shows and all that kind of stuff. I became good friends with David Webb, and I would go on as the lefty, and he would be on the right. And, you know, we'd go downstairs. You know, the SiriusXM office in New York City, we'd go right downstairs after arguing about politics, and we'd have a whiskey and a steak at Del Fresco's down there. Del Fresco's, But yeah, I didn't want to be on the LGBT channel. Anyway, I got stuck there, and then I thought, all right, I don't want to do this anymore. And then this opportunity arose with the Young Turks out here in LA. And I did that for about 2 years. That's sort of where the original Rubin Report began. And quickly within those 2 years, that's where my real political awakening began. And I started talking about how there was something deeply wrong with the left, and that if you were an old school liberal, meaning a free speech, open inquiry, tolerant, decent liberal, well, you had almost nothing in common with the progressives. And, you know, I started talking about that around 2014 into 2015. And suddenly those things that I was talking about 5 or 6 years ago now have burst forth into mainstream. So I suppose I was ahead of curve on that. And then over the course of the last 5 years, I've tried to just become more and more independent in terms of my business. So we started a production company. You know, I built a home studio. This is a new home studio that I'm in right now that we just rebuilt in the last month. You know, I've got a whole bunch of full-timer employees. I've got part-timer employees. I'm very proud of what we built. I started a tech company, locals.com, in the midst of this to help, you know, detach all of us, including anyone at Breitbart or anywhere else from big tech. And you know, I'm fighting the fight as best as I can and just trying to go where the landscape starts shifting, because we're all in this weird spot where nobody knows what the future holds right now. And I think if you've got your head on straight, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, and you and I have something in common, that we both like actually engaging with people who disagree with us. We actually are willing to learn from them in some cases and maybe come around on certain issues. And that is something that is completely unappreciated in a lot of our culture. There's some people on the right who are not like that, and virtually everyone on what we call the left, and that is differentiated from liberals. I'm sure you're familiar with this because you're close with Dennis Prager, as am I. And there's a big difference now between liberals, classical liberals, who we all like, even if we disagree with them sometimes, and people on the left that really seem to be driving the agenda in the establishment press and in the Democrat establishment. Could you speak to where you fit in this spectrum?
Yeah, well, you know, Don't Burn This Book, which came out in April, I mean, it's my defense of classical liberalism. I lay out the ideas of classical liberalism, which in essence are individual rights, meaning if you're a legal member of this American society or any society that you live in, you should have equal rights regardless of your skin color, sexual orientation, gender, nationality, meaning as long as you're legally in the country, you are treated equally as anybody else. And then you want basically the light touch of government, laissez-faire economics. You want the market to figure things out. And most people, when I say that to them, they say, oh, well, that just sounds like libertarianism. And what I say beyond that, or my response to that is, well, in essence, yes, except, you know, when you get into a debate with a libertarian, and I've been to many libertarian conferences and I love talking to libertarians, you know, the libertarians sort of have no guard rules on where they put the idea of law. And I love that intellectually, I really do. When I have the ANCAP guys on, and one of my favorite interviewees is Michael Malice, who I think is a great sort of ANCAP thinker. I love the guy, and I love that intellectually, but I do think society needs some guardrails. And I would say that is a little more within the classical liberal lens than the libertarian lens. But I would also say this, there really are no classical liberals left. I mean, in effect, because the United States has shifted so radically left, or at least the Overton window has shifted so radically left. If you're an old school liberal, in effect, I would say you're a new school conservative. I think what stops a lot of old school liberals from saying that, I think there are usually two things that they can't get over. And I've been trying to lay out a path for them to escape. The two things seem to be abortion and religion. And obviously those are intertwined for sure. But most old school liberals are pro-choice, but I would argue sensibly pro-choice. Now, you may be totally pro-life, and that's fine. But in essence, most of them would say first trimester, something like that, or 16 weeks, where now the left has gone off the deep end, and you can have 8-month abortions, and they're fine with it. And then the other one is there's generally more an aversion to religion when it comes to the classical liberals, and that's one where I've really shifted, and that comes from reading and talking to people like Yoram Harzoni and Jordan Peterson, of course, and Dennis Prager, who you referenced earlier. But if you want to defend liberalism these days, you're basically a conservative.
These are two perfect examples, and let's take them each individually. And I'm pretty across the board pro-life, but I grew up in West LA. I've only lived on the coast. I speak fluent pro-choice. And one thing that's been really interesting is as the science has evolved, and we've seen the heartbeat at such an early age, and the fingernails such an early age inside of the womb during gestation. And at the same time, you're seeing the Democrat Party position move to abortion's absolute in all cases, even in the most extreme example with Governor Northam in Virginia, where I'm a resident, talking about having a discussion post-birth, or as we darkly joke about it, fourth trimester abortions. Yeah. That to me is totally ceding the entire moral high ground to the right on this. And again, I'm pretty across the board pro-life, but it is one of these things where they're not being sensible about it, in my opinion. They should be talking about the first trimester, the first few weeks, the first few days even, if they want to win an argument. They're not talking about it. They're talking about when the baby's already out and on the operating table, breathing and kicking. It's insane to me.
You're totally right. That's very much the argument that I lay out in my book, which, by the way, I got a ton of email and regular, actually handwritten letters, which I love getting handwritten letters, from conservatives who would say to me, Dave, I love the book. I disagree with you on abortion, but I see your arguments, and it would be nice to hear more arguments from my lefty friends like that. So, it's interesting because I've debated abortion with many conservatives on my show, including Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager and Glenn Beck and several other people. And I always tell them, I say, you guys are making sound pro-life arguments. And by the way, I don't deny that when the egg and sperm come together, that's the beginning of life. I mean, it's just obvious to me that is. And then what you just laid out there is proper. Okay, so then can we talk about, the next few days when it's a blastocyst, and then, the next few days after that, and have some honest discussion between personal and religious morality versus the role of the state. That's great. But what I always say to Prager and Shapiro and Beck and my other conservative friends is, it's not necessarily your cogent arguments that have actually shifted me more to the pro-life position. It's actually the bananas arguments of the left that have pushed me away.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. It's the people that can make no distinction between 1 week and 8 months, and that their only argument is that those scary right-wingers hate and want to control women, which is just so not true. It is so not true. There are roughly half the country is women, and then roughly half the country leans right. So it's like they don't hate women or want to control women. It's just,
of course,
we've framed these arguments so terribly. But in essence, what I've tried to do is show my old school liberal friends, look, the right may not agree with you on abortion, but that shouldn't be your sort of deciding issue to vote on. I know for a lot of people on the right it is, but I don't think for the disaffected lefties, I don't think it should be. But I would also say this, a guy like Rudy Giuliani, who takes a very similar position as me on abortion, so he's sort of begrudgingly, I always say I'm begrudgingly pro-choice. Let's not forget, it's only about 10 years ago that Rudy Giuliani at one time was the leading candidate to be the Republican nominee for president. It didn't work out well for him, obviously, but he's a Trump supporter. Nobody doubts that he's a conservative. And that shows you that the right has created a pretty wide tent. And that's what I'm trying to show to my remaining liberal friends, the ones at least who will still talk to me, because while you guys are all getting purged and executed, and I always say they've executed Order 66, right? They're hunting down the last liberals throughout the galaxy. It's like, you know what? There's safe haven over here. It doesn't mean you have to agree with every conservative notion, but they'll welcome you. And I assure you, you would much rather live in the society that the conservatives want to build than the one that the progressives want to build.
And that's a perfect segue to the other issue you mentioned, which I'm curious your thoughts on, because if I remember, you're a pretty secular guy, if not an atheist or an agnostic, and please correct me if that's not true. And regardless, I want your thoughts on faith in America. It seems like we're getting more secular, and it does not seem to be helping. I'm a somewhat religious person. I attend Catholic Church when they allow me to do so once a week, but I'm not a big part of it, the part of the movement the way I am on the right. So that's kind of where I'm at, but I want to hear where you're at.
Well, I'll answer it in a couple different directions, and then maybe we can package it all together. First off, I would say in terms of the country getting more secular, I think what we're seeing in many ways is the end of pure secularism. When you see you can't tell you're not allowed to say the difference between a man and a woman. And all of the anti-science nonsense coming out of the left while they tell you that the right is anti-science. I mean, we're at the end of secularism, where nothing is moral, nothing is to be judged. Nothing is real. You are whatever gender you identify as. You're whatever color you identify as. I mean, these are crazy precepts, especially by the same people who would tell you that those immutable characteristics are the only things that matter. So at the end of secularism is the chaos that we have right now. And unfortunately, and I do describe this in the book, the liberals have no defense mechanism on this. The liberals, because they don't believe, because in essence, they've decided to believe that logic and reason, meaning their own brains, are the thing that is the highest order of society. Well, then when someone else comes in with feelings of their own, you will always cave to them. And that's why the left seems to always cave to its worst parts. And if you think that Joe Biden is the guy that's going to stand up against it, you got another thing coming. So I would say at a micro level, you can be an atheist or an agnostic or a non-believer or completely secular and non-religious and be a truly moral, decent, good human being. Without question. And I have many friends who are atheists, right? And I did consider myself an atheist for several years, and I used to talk about it on the show. At a macro level, it simply does not work. A society needs to organize around something bigger than itself. And that's why what we've done here in the United States is so brilliant. What did the founders do? The founders said we have God-given rights, and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights protects those rights. It didn't give you them. It actually creates the force field to keep those things true and pure. Because if you say the government gave me rights, well, then you're saying man gave me rights, because who created government? Man. And if you're saying man gave me rights, well, then in essence, of course, you're saying that man can take away my rights. And now the latter part of that is true. The government can take away my rights, but it didn't give me my rights. And I believe that it is your birthright as a human being to live as a free creature, as a free human. So I would say it's a macro argument. Micro level, you can be totally secular, you can be a non-believer and be totally a positive force in your family and community and all of those things. A society cannot do it without religion. And just to go a little bit further, I would say this was very much an idea that got embedded in me after being on tour with Jordan Peterson for a year and a half, because this is one of his real, I would say, his like bedrock principles. And after hearing him explain it, night after night in many different ways, it became almost a uncomfortable truth for me. Let's put it that way. So I do think we will see a resurgence of religion in America, and I hope within that if the liberals again are to do anything, if the liberals are to play a part in a future America, well then their part will be, okay, if we've got a resurgence of, say, right-wing religious fervor or something like that, I think the part for the liberals will be to make sure it never goes too far off the deep end and that we don't become a religious theocracy. But that's a good, healthy tension right there. And I think that would be a good place for the liberals to start focusing.
Yeah, and let me reset for those of you who are listening to this on Breitbart News Daily on Sirius XM. Dave Rubin is with me from the Rubin Report, one of the most popular YouTube news interview shows. He's very big on Twitter, which is at Rubin Report, and he also has a great book out called Don't Burn This Book. Great title there. And as someone who's been in the internet game for a long time, we're going to get into that in a second. But I love this point you're making about how we judge ourselves. It used to be you'd have a faith and you would be judging yourself against the principles of your faith. And then the left said that's not a good thing because all faiths have flaws in it. I'm a Catholic. I'm constantly frustrated with where the Catholic Church is at any given moment. So what's the alternative? Well, it seems like there's a couple. One is we all just create our own faith. You have the Dave Rubin faith and I have the Alex Marlow faith, and we all just wing it. That seems pretty risky because there's a lot of bad people out there, and if they're creating their own faith, that doesn't sound like a good option. Or there's the reality that we have now, which is the woke left have created their own sort of religion, and if you are not woke enough, now past, present, or future, you're getting judged and you're potentially getting canceled.
Oh yeah, well, I love this idea. My friend Peter Boghossian, who's been on the show a few times, who wrote a book, by the way, called A Manual for Creating Atheists. So you can tell what this guy's line of thinking is. He's a professor of philosophy at Portland State, and he's protested every day and hounded off campus and everything else. But he was the first one that started saying that idea, that as far as I had heard it, about that wokeism as a religion in effect.
Yes,
because you have to be totally devoted to it. But what's worse is, you know this from being a Catholic. I certainly know this from being a Jew, and most people in any faith understand that, religion is a constant struggle between sort of dogma and new ideas. It's a struggle between, in many ways, conservatism and liberalism. But generally speaking, if you're a Catholic or if you're a Jew, you could pick a position that isn't exactly in line with everything that Catholicism teaches or Judaism teaches. And most people won't say, okay, you're out of the church or you're no longer a Jew.
Right.
Wokeism is actually very different than that. Wokeism is you got to sign up for these 10 things and never leave them. But not only that, you have to sign up for them the second we all sign up for them. So whatever is the new woke idea of the day, you have a pretty short window on when you can accept it as true. And there's a fundamental reason for that. And the reason is that basically on the right, you have people who, as I said before, believe in individual rights. That's a pretty good bedrock idea to start building up from. Now, it doesn't mean that they all act on those ideas appropriately or restrain government the way they should or any of those things, but it's a bedrock principle that sort of brings these ideas together. The left no longer has a unifying principle. The only principle, as far as I can tell, that the left has is that you can use your power to create a government to control other people. That's pretty much it. That government is the answer to everything, and that pretty much everyone who doesn't believe that is a bad guy. And I think it's a deeply flawed way of thinking. It's deeply dangerous. And by the way, it's not new, right? I mean, there's a reason that communism and socialism and the big government projects of the last several hundred years have killed millions and millions of people, where free market capitalism doesn't do that.
Certainly. So let's pivot a little bit towards big tech, and this is something you write extensively about in the book. You and I both have a love-hate relationship with tech. It's been very good to me and my family and my lifestyle, and I've really enjoyed my tenure at Breitbart. I was the first employee there, and I've been a part of a lot of really cool historic stuff. But I also hate it too. I think big tech is kind of eating a bit of our soul one day at a time. I think it's addictive. I think it's like a drug, and I think it's the sort of thing that creates sometimes unhappy, unsatisfied people. And not to mention, it's got this sort of super government format to it, where these anonymous, we call them at Breitbart the masters of the universe, picking and choosing what gets promoted, what gets demoted, what's allowed, what speech is sanctioned, what speech is evil. And it's all a very complicated thing. Give me your 30,000 foot on where we are in relation to these tech overlords, and then I'll have some specifics after that.
Yeah, frankly, I'd rather talk about the other masters of the universe, because I used to have quite a collection. I'm talking, He-Man, Skeletor, Merman, Beastman. I had everybody. But I do like that phrase. And obviously, you guys at Breitbart have been right in the center of this fight. And I've been in the center of it, and a lot of other people. Yes, there is a small select group of big tech companies run by a small select group of people. And I don't mean that to sound conspiratorial. That's just a fact. There's a certain small group of people that run Twitter, and they are very close with the small group of people who run Facebook. Not always completely ideologically aligned. Zuckerberg has some differences from Jack Dorsey over at Twitter, as Zuckerberg's obviously Facebook, but also Google and YouTube. They're in essence one company. They control not only the information we see, but when we see it, how much we see it. We have no idea what these algorithms are doing to us, how they're manipulating the way we think. Twitter has shadow banning in the terms of service. In their own terms of service, it says we can, in effect, it says we can either elevate or deboost, meaning let less people see certain tweets. I mean, the whole idea when Twitter came out was you were just going to follow people and see a chronological feed. That no longer exists. So in a way, we're all playing a game. This would be like playing a baseball game and knowing that one team is playing by separate rules than the other team, and then we get the end score and one team always loses, and we go, well, what's going on here? We're basically looking at the Globetrotters and the Washington Nationals? Were they the Nationals?
I think it was the Generals.
The Generals, thank you.
Yeah.
Although the Washington Nationals do exist, at least for now.
Yeah, that's right.
So we have a major problem. This is one of those places where I think on the right, you can take a lot of different approaches to fight it. So, for example, Tucker Carlson, I've discussed this with him many times on both of our shows. You know, he wants government intervention. He absolutely believes government intervention should be there. I come from a slightly more libertarian approach, which would be that I want competition to do something, as daunting as that is. But, you know, to go back to the religion thing before, David beat Goliath. So if David beat Goliath, well, maybe Dave can beat Google. Maybe these things have become so overgrown that their bones are actually weak. I actually think that that's what's going to happen here. These companies will not always exist. You know, there have been large conglomerates over millennia, or at least certainly since the American Industrial Revolution, that have existed that don't exist anymore, that we all thought would exist forever, right? And I think what could happen is they will crumble under the weight of their own crap. On top of the fact that, let's not forget, they've also allowed themselves to be infected by social justice and critical race theory. And once you let that in, you will no longer hire the best engineers. You will no longer hire the best managers and the most competent people. You will hire people based on their skin color and sexuality. Now, that's not to say that people of a certain color or sexuality can't do the job adequately, but you should be hiring only based on skill. I have a small business. I don't care what color you are or what gender you are or sexuality. If you can do the job, I will hire you. It's as simple as that. I thought that's what Martin Luther King wanted, but apparently not anymore.
We did too. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but how long till he gets canceled?
Right. Well, no, he's on his way. No, trust me. I mean, look, what he said, the quote that is most often attributed to him, about that he did not want his children growing up in a place where their skin color would matter more than the content of their character. That is the reverse of what modern day social justice says. So when you see monuments being torn down, you should understand that there is an MLK monument in DC, and that will be torn down. He will be seen as a co-conspirator, basically. He will be seen as someone that played with the patriarchy or something like that, because it's a movement that eats itself. But just to finish the big tech thing real quick, I think you can have the calls for regulation. I think you can have the calls for what Trump did, which is, you know, scale back some of their protections under the law, which is what he did related to Section 230C in the Communications Act, Section 230 in the Communications Act. And then I think you can also have lawsuits like PragerU sued YouTube because they were putting their videos on restricted mode. And then you can also have competition. So I think there's a rich place that we all have to fight differently. We don't all have to be ground troops. You know, we need tanks, we need helicopters, and we need the Air Force too.
So do you feel like that there is a timeline on this? Because my one concern with your approach, I have several. I'm much more closer to Tucker's position, I think, on this.
Yeah,
but
I get it. Trust me, I get it. I'm not telling you that I'm totally right on this.
Yeah, and it's not. I want to ask you something that I'm curious about. Do you feel like there's a timeline? Because I know you, like me, are in a war for the American mind, and we're trying to expose Americans to a wide variety of ideas. I think you and I both think that our ideas can win in a fair fight. And the question I have is that how long can this unfair fight go on before Americans are totally compromised, where they've just been fed a steady diet of America not only is a horrible place now, but it's always been a horrible place, and the key is not judging people on the content of their character, it's representation. Representation is the most important thing. And how long could we have a society where that stuff is prioritized and legitimate viewpoints that, for example, we express at Breitbart, getting pushed either off or down the pages of these big tech platforms? How long can that go on before we're completely lost?
Well, it's a great question, and I guess to bring it back to those Washington Generals, there must have been a guy on the Washington Generals who knew he was going to lose every game, but kept fighting the good fight anyway. You know, he must have been in the locker room going, guys, we can do it today. We can do it today. Look, that's the great question related to all of this. That is what this all boils down to, is at a certain level, I think what you're asking is, have we lost already? Because has the game already been fixed to the point where mainstream media, where Hollywood, where big tech, where all of it has become so corrupt, has done things to manipulate us and to hide information from us at such a high level that our ability to come back from that is gone. Now, I think someone making that argument could make a pretty cogent argument right there. the pushback on that, and the reason I would say I'm still an optimist, although a world-weary optimist on this, is that people are waking up. People are not buying. I mean, look, CNN's ratings are terrible. Whatever they are for Anderson Cooper tonight, my show, I will most likely have more views, and they're actual views, by the way, not just airport views. I will have more views on whatever content I put up today on YouTube than Anderson Cooper will have on CNN tonight. Now, his operation also cost millions of dollars on any given day with the amount of staff. You know, it's a little less now because of the way they're filming things, but generally speaking, you know, tons of staff and unions and all of those things. You know what I've got? I got a camera, I got my producer Michael sitting right here, and I got a computer, and we're good to go. So I think by being slimmer and trimmer, and that sort of links us back to your earlier question about staying ahead of the game in the tech space, I think we can win the minds. I think we can win the hearts. The question is really, how corroded is the system? How broken is it? Right. And what will these people do? What will these people do in effect to silence people like us? And that is really one of the dangers of the asymmetry right now. You know, if you're on the right, you know, you don't view government as the benevolent leader of all of us. You don't view it as your salvation, but on the left they do. So they would love to use the power of government to silence people, where on the right, again, it's not to say nobody on the right wants to use government to silence people, but generally it's not a precept of people on the right, where government is the end all be all on the left. So they would gladly do things, by the way, like, what would they do? Well, they might send the IRS to investigate Tea Party Act groups like Obama did, right? We all know that. Right. Has Trump been investigating Media Matters or Soros-linked groups? I don't think so. You know, they kind of talk about maybe they'll do some stuff, but the right doesn't use the levers of power because they don't believe that those are the end all be all. And that asymmetry does put us at a tough spot.
Yeah, that's why I feel like we're in this foot race to have the people on the woke left that think that there are certain things that simply cannot be said or considered. When they hit critical mass, if they hit it before folks like you and I can reach people, not even Dave, probably if we took 10 ideas, maybe we'd agree on 6.5 of them. That's not even the point. The point is that we would be willing to go back and forth. And that was something that I loved about America, that this is what America was all about. And what's remarkable is that if you look at Trump's platform, he's actually adopted a few of the Democrats' best ideas. I joke that he actually took all their best ideas. You know, fixing trade, no endless wars, bring the troops home. We don't have to bomb everyone. The list goes on. We need an infrastructure program. And all the stuff, you would think this would make him more popular. No, of course not. It makes him much less popular. The left really resents.
In many ways. Yeah, well, in many ways, that is sort of the genius of Trump. Let's not forget, Trump was the first president in the history of the United States, not even Barack Obama, who as a first-time presidential candidate was for gay marriage. Barack Obama, first time around, was not for gay marriage. So that's Trump took what was thought of as a lefty talking point or a Democratic talking point. But even more deep than that, the other stuff that you just mentioned there is totally right. Trump is not a war president. We're supposed to think of Republicans and conservatives for nation building and war. No, it's the Democrats now who seem to want to declare war on Russia, apparently. Not only that, but Trump, I don't know if you heard about this, Trump is literally creating peace in the Middle East. Israel has signed 2 deals.
It's a huge deal.
Now they're saying there could be as many as 9 more coming to completely change the paradigm in the Middle East. That changes the entire world. These are things that I thought everybody wanted, right? I thought everybody, peace in the Middle East. We all disagree on everything, but what does everyone want? Well, everybody wants peace in the Middle East, but apparently not if Trump gives it, to the point where the Atlantic, which is a shell of its former self, they wrote a piece on how they should just disband the Nobel Prize now because Trump might get it because of this. It's like, you guys, when you talk about Trump derangement syndrome, these people truly have it. But I think your question is correct, which is the point of your question, which is sort of like Trump. I think Trump is the last sort of bridge between conservatism and liberalism that we're ever going to have if the left wins this election. Because if they win this election, what will happen to the right is they're going to go, okay, Trump was a little, he's a character, he's orange, his hair is crazy, but he was sort of a center-right guy. You know what?
Sure.
If that didn't even work, let's really go right. And then we'll have something that I think would be truly scary. And the left, we know that Biden is just the placeholder for the bananas lefties. So if people think it's bad right now, it could get much worse. And ironically, someone like me, the only way you stop it is you vote for Trump. I can't believe it, but there I am.
See, but this is also amazing, too, because I know that there's probably a lot of people in your audience and a few people in Breitbart's audience as well who are Bernie Sanders supporters. And Bernie Sanders was for closed borders until it became impossible to hold that position within the Democratic Party, because he understood the first people penalized with over widespread immigration are the lowest rungs of society, the exact people the guy claims he's fighting for. So he got it before the party bosses get your hooks in you.
Well, if you were to say to me, Dave, do you get any of the populism, the populist energy behind Bernie? I would say yes. But if you would say to me, Dave, do you believe that any of the policy prescriptions supported by Bernie are the right answers? I would say no. So that's where I think Trump bested Bernie. They actually had some of the similar issues. Look, Tucker is a populist, and he's become, I think, really like Tucker Carlson, obviously I'm talking about. Of course, he's become sort of the main intellectual backing behind Trump, the main mainstream, I should say, intellectual backing behind Trumpism. And it's like Bernie's whole problem wasn't that he didn't have any sense of what the issues were. It was that his problem was the system is horrible, but the way to fix it is to give it more money and just to get my people in power.
Right.
That's not how you fix a system. That's actually how you strengthen a system against people, because not everyone agrees what the right solutions are. The only way you take some power back as people is to give a little less power to the government. And oddly, although Trump obviously loves power, what has he done? He has gotten rid of a ton of regulation. He's given power to the states. Whether you think his COVID response is good or not, in essence, giving power to the states, I think, is the right thing to do. So I think he's governed really as sort of a center-right thing, which I think is the future. The future of politics in pluralistic societies, I fully believe to be center-right future. Australia voted that way. The UK voted that way. Israel voted that way. The only country in recent elections that didn't is Canada, which is a little bizarre, but I think once Trudeau finishes wrecking Canada, or Western Canada secedes, they'll vote another way too. But I think a center-right future is the right course if you want to live in a free society.
Yeah, and we're at this moment where we just can't get past the personal. People can't get past the mean tweets and some of the things Trump says in the rallies. Of course, I delight in most of those things most days, but a lot of people can't. And I understand it, but if you look at his policies, if you actually look at the policies, they're very much populist, center-right. And we'll see how it shakes out with the voters when you've got these people on the left who are behaving like bullies, Dave. And this is one thing that I'm noticing at this particular moment. Everyone is mourning the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, even though I disagree with a lot of her judicial decisions, was someone who I think a lot of people on the right, myself included, respected as an American. And who was her best friend? It was Antonin Scalia. She was a class act. What would she think if she was? What do you think her reaction would be that people are now in her name saying we're going to pack the court in your honor, though she was against court packing? It seems so manipulative and blatantly political, and yet that's exactly what happened within 24 hours of her death. You have Jerry Nadler coming out there and saying we're going to pack the court in her honor, though she opposed it. This is just crazy stuff that the media won't talk about.
It's even more perverse than that, because what they immediately started to say wasn't just packing the courts, but you could find AOC and Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris all saying some version of it was her dying wish. Yes. It was her dying wish that Trump not replace her. Right. The implication being that we shouldn't be governed by the laws and the Constitution, but we should be governed by dying wishes. Now let's try to do the other version of this. Let's say a conservative judge passed away, and their fervent dying wish was that they didn't get replaced by the Democratic president. Do you think the Democratic lawmakers would be calling for respecting the dying wish? I mean, it's just, it's silly, overly emotional nonsense. But to the heart of what you're asking, the left has made a decision. none of the norms matter anymore. The second they get into power, they will gladly destroy the Electoral College. They will gladly destroy the amount of justices on the Supreme Court. There will be nothing that exists now. They are telling you, I mean, this was the point of the 1619 Project. America wasn't founded on a place that was going to give more people more freedom than any other place on earth, which is exactly what it did. It was founded because of slavery, as if that was the primary driver, which, by the way, now the 1619 Project people are slowly removing. They're deleting a lot of their tweets, and they're removing a lot of the stuff that they themselves put out there because it's ahistorical nonsense, but it's been swallowed fully by the New York Times, obviously, and CNN and most of academia and everything else. So we got a major fight ahead of us. But I'll tell you this, you can find videos of mine in 2013 when I was a lefty and a Democrat, and I was on the Young Turks, a far left YouTube channel. And when Harry Reid did that nuclear option, when he said, okay, you don't have to have that supermajority anymore, you just have to have the 51, to confirm a justice, there are videos of me as a lefty saying, this is a bad move, guys, because if you change this now, it's exactly what Mitch McConnell said. It'll be used against you, and it'll be used against you more quickly than you can imagine. And so this is the fault of the Democrats. This is the fault. They were the ones that made this policy a policy. It's Harry Reid's fault, and they all clapped the entire way. And congratulations, because Trump is obviously nominating someone. We hear it's happening this weekend. And you know what? He's going to get the 50, the 51, whether Romney's involved or not, because he's got Pence as the tiebreaker.
Sure. And I think Romney's in as of now. And by the way, Dave, this is why, how in the UK the first toast is always to the Queen, and the Marlow house is always to Harry Reid. He always gets the first toast. We always thank him. Dave Rubin, the Rubin Report. Don't burn this book. Last question for today, Dave, is that you and I have a very similar, I think, persona in the sense that we're both sort of happy warriors. We don't tend to give a lot of ground when we're debating people, but we kind of do it with a smile and without yelling. I obviously believe we should have a little more of that these days. I think that'd be very healthy. But speak to this and why it does feel like there's so few people who take that viewpoint.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that as the last question, because I've actually found it more difficult lately because, since my book came out, I'm now, in an odd sense as an interviewer, I've become more well known for my views and thoughts on things than on the interviewing side. So I always liken this to my friend and mentor, Larry King, who, for 40 years was the best interviewer we had in America, but you really didn't know any of his opinions. And that made it safe for him to create a space for people to share theirs. I really did the best I could with that for the, first 5 years of my show. And as the world has shifted, and I think as all of our roles shift, I think it's not incumbent on me, I have no choice but to say what I think. And that in some ways has made my job as an interviewer more difficult. I'll give you one example. I interviewed Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian presidential candidate, a few days ago. And as I said to you earlier, I love all of those ideas intellectually, like, okay, legalize everything and everyone do whatever you want. And that's, her basic premise on everything. That's the point of the Libertarian Party. And I like a lot of that stuff, but I just think the rubber meets the road, and then you do need some structure. And at the end of the interview, and I said that to her repeatedly during the interview, but at the end of the interview, she said, so did I convince you to vote for me? And I said, no. I said, I like all these interviews. I'm an ally. I like all these ideas, and I'm an ally in this conversation with you. But I think the left is such a threat that I see no way around voting for Donald Trump, on top of the other reasons that I think he's been pretty good. That was a very odd moment for me as an interviewer.
Sure.
Because I, usually they don't turn it on you, but then I thought, well, what would be the honest approach here? And the honest approach would be saying what I feel. So that's one thing. And then really as far as having conversations and being decent to people across the aisle and all sorts of stuff like that, I think it probably, although this is the first time we've met, Alex, I think I can tell a little bit, you're sort of wired in a certain way in that I suspect you don't yell at your employees a lot. And that doesn't mean you're not passionate. No. Right, it doesn't mean you're not passionate. I am deeply passionate about what I do. I live and breathe this from the second I wake up till the moment I go to sleep. But my wiring is a little cooler. I sense your wiring's probably a little cooler.
Exactly
while some people burn really hot. So I think that could be a little bit of nature nurture stuff. But then on top of it, I grew up in a family where no one in my family was in politics, but everyone was political in that we argued about everything. Every freaking holiday, 40 people at a table arguing about abortion, arguing about foreign policy, arguing about the president, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end, dessert was served and we were okay. And no grudges were held. And that just got built into me. And I'm guessing that your story is probably somewhat similar.
It's very similar, but the thing that is dangerous is when people mistake the lack of screaming at people to a lack of passion and logic and force behind the ideas. And that's what I dig about you, Dave, and that's why this was so fun to do this. And I hope we do it again sometime.
Well, I appreciate it. And listen, if every time someone came on my show and I had to yell at them for disagreeing, it would be like, what would I be doing with my life? You know what I mean? I'd be chewing Prilosec. So I don't want to do that. Look, I let their ideas stand, and if you like them, explore more. If you like my ideas, that's great. And I guess I have a more optimistic view of what humans are capable of, I suppose.
I think I do too, and that's good because I think you'll be around for a while, as will I, and we at Breitbart as well. Thanks again, everyone listening and watching across all of our platforms. Of course, thanks to Dave Rubin and his team for making this happen. A lot of people to thank on Breitbart, and Matt Purdy, Ali J. Nikolai, Kenny Preston, Elizabeth Moore. A lot of people helping make this possible. Thanks one and all. Zenny Fong, of course, as well. Thanks, everyone.